This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me and anything you want to know about me on my website at hikingbob.com, where there's links to my social media, my columns at the Colorado Springs Independent, which hopefully I'll be returning to them pretty soon. My photography website, my Patreon page, if you'd like to help support this podcast, you can do that at Patreon, patreon.com/hikingbob, and you can get rewards depending on your level of support. And also you can sign up for my newsletter, which comes out every week. And also you can send me an email if you have a topic or a guest you'd like to hear on the podcast. Certainly drop me an email, or if you have a comment or question, certainly drop me an email. We get questions all the time about trails and things like that. Happy to answer them. So visit me at hikingbob.com. And now, as a special guest today, we have somebody else from the U.S. Forest Service. We've had a couple of Forest Service related podcasts over the last couple of weeks. But today we have Earl Huie, who is and Earl, you're going to have to help me with your exact title here. Okay. I guess he's going to be calling a forest cop, but I know that's not really the way to do it. Is it a law enforcement?
Yes,
what's your title exactly?
United States Forest Service Law Enforcement Officer.
Okay. So calling you a forest cop is not way off, but it's.
I've been called many things, but yeah.
hopefully all of them nice things. So your job is you're the law enforcement for the U.S. Forest Service, and I guess specifically the Pikes Peak Ranger District, or do you encompass a little more than that district?
Yes, sir. So, I do cover the Pikes Peak Rangers District. I can go into specific duties as a law enforcement officer. So as a Forest Service law enforcement officer, it's our duty to protect like the public, our employees, all the natural resources on the forest. As we know here on the Front Range, the numbers of the public use for recreational use has grown, and with that, so has the demand for enforcement. So working on that, in order for the public to be safe, it is my duty to ensure our laws and regulations on the Pike National Forest, and just as a cop would, Bob, in Colorado Springs enforce their laws to keep the public safe in the city. So National Forest System lands is multi-use, and the Pike National Forest itself is 1.1 million acres. That being said, our agency has very broad level of employees. We have biologists, hydrologists, NEPA planners, firefighters, timber specialists, and recreation staff, just to name a few. We also get a large number of volunteers organized by our staff to assist us on the forest. And it's my duty as an LEO to ensure their safety and staff for the volunteers. As for our natural resources, we both know they can't defend themselves, same with the wildlife. So it's our duty as LEOs to defend and protect these resources, kind of like the Lorax, if you're into children's books, Bob.
So it sounds like you got a whole lot going on there, and it is. And having been in public safety all my life, I know that there's not just one thing anybody does. You're always doing multiple things. But let me take a step back a minute. Did you get into the Forest Service as law enforcement because of you wanted a career in law enforcement, or did you want a career in the Forest Service, or kind of a combination of two? How do you end up being a Forest Service law enforcement officer? I mean, people think you become a sheriff, a city cop, a highway patrolman, or something like that. But how did you end up in the Forest Service? Which one came first, I guess, is the question I'm looking for there.
Be honest with you, Bob, I had no intentions of becoming a cop or law enforcement of any kind. I'll try to keep a long story short. My wife was a state park interpreter in Arkansas State Parks. I was approached by one of their district rangers there, and he said that they needed more law enforcement and I should join it. And that kind of got the brain kicking a little bit as to what I wanted to do after I got out of college and stuff. And so we moved to Colorado. She was finishing up her degree at her master's degree at Western. And I happened to run into some Forest Service law enforcement officer, Mike Fuller, down in Gunnison. And I started talking with him. I started talking with the BLM ranger down there, and got to get my name out a little bit and started seeing what they do. I went on ride-alongs. I was hearing all the different things and aspects they do in the forest and what they, what they're out there for. And I was really enjoying hearing that. I had some buddies that were wildland firefighters, and they came to me and said, "Hey, we have a position opening up. Why don't you apply for it?" I applied and I got the position. So I did wildland firefighting first, and that kind of got my foot in the door with the Forest Service. In fact, my previous patrol captain, who's our now commander, he called me up while I was in Montana, and I actually had an interview for this position while I was on a fire in Montana. I was pretty happy about that.
So you're sitting there coughing with the smoke and everything, going, well, I'm trying to do this interview at the same time. I just imagine how that went. And so here you are in the Pike National Forest and the Pikes Peak Rangers, and that's a great story. I mean, I think that's how a lot of people end up in jobs. I didn't always want to be a firefighter. It ended up being what I did for many years, but I wanted to be in law enforcement, and I kind of did that for a little bit in the Air Force. And I said, I kind of like the firefighting side of things. And then later on, I kind of melded them together, sort of like what you did, by being an arson investigator for the fire department and kind of like working for the sheriff on my days off and stuff. So somehow a lot of people end up melding their different aspirations when they find a career path they want to go down. And I think it's interesting to hear those stories about how people kind of weigh different things. I've told people if I actually grew up in Colorado, instead of moving here quite a while ago, I probably would have been a park ranger instead of a firefighter or something like that, just depending on which way circumstances went, if that kind of makes sense. We all have an idea, I think, of what a local town police officer does. Patrol neighborhoods, catch people speeding, respond to different calls for service of whatever type they may be, barking dogs or whatever, or maybe things more serious. How does that differ from your job? Do you spend more time patrolling the forest? Do you spend more time responding to calls for service? How many calls for service does a Forest Service law enforcement officer get during a week or something like that?
I get a lot of calls, especially here on the Front Range. Not nearly as much as a city cop or a sheriff's deputy or anything like that, because they're here. They have thousands and thousands of people, whereas me in the forest, it's people up there recreating. It's OHV use. So I spend a lot of my time on patrol, taking calls if need be. The part about taking calls is if I'm up on, let's say, Gold Camp area, and there's an accident over on Rampart Range, that's an extended ETA for me, to get from one place to another. So sometimes you're looking at, if I have a call over there, it could be up to 2 hours before I can respond to that. So a lot of my patrols, are contacts while on patrol. I make, excuse me, I make a lot of contacts, especially during the weekends. And it's usually I'll go out and find things that are happening, and unfortunately some of them I don't find. So happening whenever I'm on patrol on Gold Camp and all of a sudden something happened on Rampart, I don't find it till the next week, or somebody else comes across it and they send it my way. I do have a lot of things that I'll get calls on while at the office or on my days off that I'll have to kind of, put on my plate to check my following patrol. So I'll go check on those. And then once I'm done with that, then I'll just continue patrolling.
Okay.
I'll pick a certain area during the weekend, and just go, like, if I want to go on Gold Camp, let's say I haven't been up there for a couple of days or a week or whatever, I get up there and that'll be my specific area for the day. But sometimes it deviates. Plans always change, as you know.
Sure. You could have all the plans in the world and something comes in and then you're, 180 degrees in the opposite direction for the rest of the day or something.
Yep.
You mentioned a little bit about OHV use and getting calls from the public. What do you see as the biggest thing you get calls about? Is it people with motorized vehicles? Is it illegal camping? Is it what do you get the most? Is there any one thing that you get more calls about than anything else?
I'd say most of my calls are people using the National Forest System lands for residential use. I get a lot of calls from the Monument Friends over there by Mount Herman. So I'll respond to those as they come in. I guess, are you wanting to know, like what I'm seeing most here on the Pike?
Well, what you get the most calls about, and then what do you see the most of on your own? So either way, that'd be good.
Some of the biggest challenges here I have is like target shooting, recreational target shooting, abandoned property. I get a lot of abandoned property, and like I just mentioned, the residential use. So the residing issue is everywhere in this region, and in my experience, more so here on the Pikes Peak Ranger District. Much of those using the forest for residential purposes are down on their luck, or in between jobs, or trying to find a place to live. Some choose to live out of their camper trailers and claim to be recreational camping, when in fact they're using the forest system lands for residential use, which is also prohibited by Code of Federal Regulation. Another big one is the rise of recreational target shooting. As I said earlier, in this area, it has extremely increased. The majority of the target shooters, they're being responsible and trying to do the right thing. However, as you know, the population here on the Front Range, there are many that do not take the time to stop and read our information kiosk, or even go online to find out what our regulations and laws are for target shooting. And all too often, while on patrol, I find the remnants of what was left behind from target shooters, like, beautiful live trees being shot to pieces, debris from cans and appliances that were dumped on the forest to use for targets, broken glass, shells that were spent from the ammo. During my time on the Pike, I've impounded many of abandoned camper trailers and a large amount of personal property that was left and dumped on the forest. Many of these trailers are unregistered, so it's hard to track down who the owner is. Typically, they were using the forest for residential purposes, and they never registered their trailer. So a lot of times I come across these when it's too late. And then trash and debris has already been scattered throughout the site. So, yeah, all that being said, this district keeps me busy, and there's never a dull moment, Bob.
So residential use, I'm guessing that is people using it over a certain period of time. What would be, when do you hit a period of time that becomes more residential use than me going out camping for a few days?
So I'm trying to place that line. There's a thin line there. You got, your recreational camping. You get 14 days if you're actually out there recreationally camping, or if you're using the forest system land for residential use. I get a lot of people that'll say, "Hey, I'm just camping," when in fact they just admitted to living in their RV or living on the forest, or they're in between houses or jobs and whatever it may be. And usually I'm pretty straightforward about that. I'll let them know, here's where the law is and here's where you're outside the law. But if I have no other, issues with them, there's no warrants out for their arrest, there's no sanitation issues, there's no other complaints from them, then I'll just, we'll treat it as a 14-day camp stay, but then I tell them they need to move on after the 14 days.
Okay. When you hear from people about, when you may get a call or somebody stops you when they see you on patrol and they complain about, or they let you know about somebody who appears to be residentially using the forest, is their biggest concern that there's somebody staying out there for a long time, or is there bigger concern that there may be trash and waste issues? What really gets people to want to contact you about somebody who might be out in the forest for a long time?
I think, Bob, with your experience, this too. I think the biggest concern is wildfire. They're afraid that they're going to leave a campfire going all night, or maybe even abandon the campfire, which happens a lot on our forest. And sanitation. They don't like to see, just garbage and stuff spread everywhere. And typically those who are residing on the forest have a lot of belongings, a lot of stuff with them. And sometimes that stuff gets left behind. And I think that's the biggest concern from the public when they report that to me. With
that issue, what do you deal with that? If somebody says, "Hey, I've got no place to live and this is where I want to be," I guess in my thinking, a part of it is that's unfortunate, but this isn't the place for you to be. Is that that's pretty much what your thinking is? Like, yeah, that really is terrible, but you can't be here. How do you do you try to help them find a place that they can go, or what is your response? And tell them you got to leave, but do you help them find a place to go, or what are your resources that you can use to help them find the appropriate place to be?
Exactly. Bob, I keep phone numbers, and Colorado has a Colorado crisis line. I know of some places in Colorado Springs or Manitou Springs that'll take people in. Even Woodland Park, there's some help there. I'll give these folks whatever information I can, and I will give them. Typically, I'll give them time depending on the situation. If it's just a complete mess and they need to leave now, then I try to push the throttle a little more. But I show empathy. I do feel bad for some of these folks, especially if there's children involved or anything like that. So I try to help them out best I can instead of just coming in there with a hammer and giving tickets and stuff. I do try to help them out best I can. But you're right, though, they can't live there. If we allowed that for everybody, we may not have a forest left. So, but yeah, I try to show empathy. I try to give them whatever time. I'll even ask them, hey, how much time do you need to get off here? How about the rest of the weekend, something like that. So I've even had people come back and thank me later on. I had a family come back. They saw me on the forest. They stopped me and waved me down. And I was in my head. I was like, man, I know these people. I just don't, I don't remember. And he reminded me, yeah, you helped us out. You gave us time. And now I have a good job. I've got a place to stay, and I got a new vehicle. And I was like, congratulations. It's awesome. So that felt good. Felt really good inside.
Cool. I think for me as the average user, and I think I probably have the same opinion as probably most people who are the average forest user, go out there hiking and camping or whatever, is that you want to feel empathetic towards people who may, due to circumstances beyond their control, end up out there. But I think what kind of gets people on edge is when they see that it's the forest, the land is being disrespected, it's being trashed, fires, waste, or they're leaving stuff behind. I think that's where people such as myself may move from being empathetic to, I just really don't want you out here because you're just destroying everything. I'm guessing that's what you hear from people who stop and talk to you and tell you about somebody who may be out there a little longer than they should be or something.
Exactly. They'll say the same thing. They're just disrespecting our resources. And, whenever I come across make those contacts, I will definitely point those out. And I'll let them know, hey, you've got some sanitation issues. I need this cleaned up right away. Or you got a campfire here going, or, whatever it may be. I'll address those issues, and I will stick to those. And if they become bigger issues, then I'll start enforcing it. And typically, I'd say 90+% of the time, it turns out to be a good contact. They clean up right away or whatever it may be. But there are those handful of folks that, I come back a little later and it's even more trash than what it was earlier. So then that's whenever I start writing paper after that. So,
Some people may not always get the message. So you have to kind of get a little more tougher with them. And I dealt with the same thing in my career. What other issues, you mentioned a little bit of recreational shooting, and I know and this may be before you started here, but Mount Herman Road, for example, you talked about the Mount Herman area used to have a lot of recreational shooting, and things got pretty out of hand there. People on Mount Herman Road or the Mount Herman Trail had some near misses. Things got a little ugly up there. They closed shooting up there. Rampart Range Road, and I know this definitely goes way back, so this is before you were here, actually had a shooting range up there that ended up being a complete, and you've probably heard about it, a complete environmental disaster, which took a lot of cleanup and closing it. Now, if you don't know where that is, when you drive up there, you'd miss it. But I, was here when that all happened. How is the Forest Service? This may be more at a management level, but how is the Forest Service trying to accommodate people who want to do recreational shooting? I think we can argue that recreational shooting, target shooting, being proficient with your weapons and stuff is a valid use. But how is the Forest Service trying to accommodate recreational shooters?
Okay, I can speak about this a little bit for you because we've already gone public with it, as I believe the Pike National Forest is going to develop target shooting areas only instead of just a wide range of just being able to shoot wherever you want. And as we spoke about earlier, the forest is multi-use. So we have to accommodate for everybody, your target shooters, your OHV riders, campers, hikers, mountain bikers. We have to accommodate for everybody. So to help out with the target shooting community, we're going to develop. So we have a partnership called the Southern Shooting Partnership. We're going to develop on each district. We will have one or two primary places developed by engineers to have safer place to shoot. You'll have long distance ranges. You'll have pistol ranges, clay shooting, stuff like that. And it's in the NEPA process right now. So they're going through all the different environmental studies and stuff like that, just to make sure that there's no more further damage to resource or anything like that. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited about that, and I think all of our other users, recreational users, are excited as well. And so, yeah, that being said, hopefully it comes around sooner than later. But yeah,
These things take a little bit of time. So am I correct in saying that right now, and I mean, if I oversimplify this, please correct me, that you can pretty much shoot anywhere except where they tell you not to, and there's going to be, you can't shoot anywhere except where we tell you you can? Is that kind of the change of philosophy that's happening with this?
we do have restricted areas, but most of especially here on the Front Range, it'll be specific to that developed area only.
Okay.
Able to shoot outside of that. Shooting outside of that specific area would be against the law, basically. We'll probably start off with soft enforcement, making sure the public knows about it, getting signs out there. But I tell you, I've seen the plans for the range, and it's like going to a really nice with lanes and all that. So it's going to be engineered quite well, and I think the public will like it. So.
As an outdoor user, I own guns, and we definitely look for a place that's safe to go and target practice. I think that users will appreciate that they know that other than in these specific areas, and with the exception of hunting season or something like that, they should not encounter anybody shooting anywhere else. And if they do, they can give you a call. I think that's going to really change the dynamic between the different user groups, the shooting groups and the OHV users and the hikers and campers. And I think they're going to be once this gets entrenched and people realize this is where you can go to shoot, that there's definitely got to be a safety increase. There was that unfortunate incident just outside of the Ranger District up in, I think it was just over the line in Douglas County last year before, where somebody was hit by a stray round. They believe, if I remember correctly, was from somebody shooting someplace. And a stray round hit them.
That was before I came. I know of one incident in Rainbow Falls. That is on my district.
Okay.
I know of that incident. I don't know all the ins and outs of that one. But yeah, it was very unfortunate. I've personally had some close calls while I'm out in the forest. I've gotten reports of others having close calls. So yeah, it'll definitely change the dynamic of things up on the forest for all the recreational use.
I think that's a huge step in the right direction. I'm glad to see the Forest Service moving to that. Here's where you can go, and other than that, this is where you go. We talked a little bit about the various federal laws. You enforce federal laws. You enforce Forest Service regulations. The state of Colorado and the various municipalities have their own rules, their own laws. I enforced Colorado laws when I was out investigating fires and things like that. You have a federal commission. Do they also commission you at the state level in Colorado so you can enforce Colorado's laws regarding like wildfires and things like that?
In the state of Colorado, we're not considered peace officers as federal law enforcement officers here. We do have MOUs and agreements with state patrol. We have to where we can enforce traffic violations such as speeding or no registration or no insurance, stuff like that. So we can write that on the forest, because I have come across many people that didn't think because they were on the forest that they had to have all that, but it is state law. So yeah, we're able to enforce some of those things, not everything, but a lot of times, relying on those relationships with state or county and stuff like that, and get them to come out and say, hey, this is what I came across, and they'll come out and help with that. So, yeah.
Okay. And that brings me to another question. It's basically yourself and another law enforcement officer. Is that correct for the Pikes Peak District?
I am so happy to say, Bob, we now have 3 permanent LEOs and our reserve officer. So I'm sorry, 4 permanent LEOs.
Whoa.
2, yeah. It blows my mind. I'm so excited now. But yeah, we have an officer that filled the South Park Ranger District to our west, the South Platte Ranger District to our north, and now I have a second permanent with me on the Pikes Peak Ranger District. We've had to do a lot with the stats we were getting and the increase in users and just how much is going on here on the Front Range. And I was able to get another permanent officer, and our reserve officer starts up again here next pay period. So I'm really happy to have more help. I can focus more on the Front Range now. There's a lot more going on the Front Range that I didn't even know about. So I'm able to focus my attention more here on the Front Range.
That's a huge step in the right direction. And having been here for a long time, I know that this a district that typically had one ranger all year round, and that was it. And it's like I'm watching the city grow and the usage of the force grow, and I'm going, there's no way that's enough. As I watch the city police department grow and the county sheriff's department grow because responding to an increase in use and population, and the Forest Service didn't. So I'm really thrilled to see that there's so much more in the way of enforcement out there. And having talked to Carl Bauer, the district ranger, how his staff in general is just increasing because it seems like whatever it took to finally wake people up way above everybody's head that we really need more help here, that's finally triggered. And now we are getting in all variety and all kinds of help, more help on the recreation side. Exactly. And the law enforcement side and administration. I think that's a huge step in the right direction. I'm really happy to hear that there's more potential for enforcement out there. You kind of touched it when you talked about other agencies. How do you work with the county sheriffs, the state patrol? You mentioned you get a car wreck and you might be on Gold Camp Road and the car accident may be over on Rampart Range Road. How do you work with those agencies in responding to those incidents? Do they cover for you? Do you pretty much have to handle it yourself? Do they go and assist you? How does that work when you're out there?
When I'm out there on patrol and I get those accidents, yeah, they will go up and they will find the accident. They're really good about dispatching their own people to go up there. When it comes to traffic accidents and those kind of state violations, it ends up being a civil matter. And we're on the federal side, so we're more on the, we're enforcing and out there for the natural resources and stuff like that. And but yeah, they get up there and they'll take care of that. And there's, many times that I've been the first on scene for accidents because I just happen to be at the right place, the right time. But yeah, you're right. It'd take me forever to get to an accident, and by that time, who knows what had happened to, if there was injuries or not? Because sometimes we get calls and they have unknown injuries, and that you start getting all these things in your head like, oh my gosh, gotta hurry up and get there. So and while I'm out in the mountain, the only source of communication is the radio. So I'll try to say, hey, can you get a hold of El Paso County or Teller County and see if they can get somebody out there right away. Even Woodland Park PD's been up on the force with me too, and State Patrol, out there helping out. So yeah, they respond to those crashes and any other incidents that I might need them for.
Excellent. How about your relationship with Parks and Wildlife, especially I imagine more with their district game wardens and stuff like that? You have a lot of interactions with them. If there's a hunting, what you believe may be a hunting violation, do you pretty much just pass that off to them, or how does something like that work out?
We do have that authority to enforce any kind of wildlife violations or anything like that. A lot of times, though, if it's something bigger in the realm of hunting, I will take all the information. I will hand it over to our local CPW officers, Coy Adler or Tim Kronig or anybody like that, and they'll gladly take it from me. Just recently had an incident where Pikes Peak America's Mountain Rangers found somebody feeding the bighorn sheep, and they got pictures and everything, and I sent that over to our CPW officers and they took care of it. As far as my relationship with them, yeah, it's outstanding. If they've been known to, if they're in the area of Rampart Range or something, they know that I'm on a contact, they'll come back me up. And same with them. If I'm in the same area as them and I hear them on the radio, and they go in with state patrol as well. I go on with their dispatch a lot of times, and if I hear them in the area and I'm just happen to be there, yeah, I'll be out there for them. Because a lot of times they're by themselves too.
Right.
So we try to help each other out as much as possible. They're a great relationship with CPW.
The CPW officers are kind of like you. They have a very big area and pretty much just one or two people out there. So it's good that you're all out there, kind of taking care of each other. There was an issue that came up last year, and we're not going to talk about the policy of it, but there was a lot of concern about closing part of Old Stage Road. Now, some of that is outside the forest. It's in the city limits of Colorado Springs, or it's El Paso County. Some of it ends up in the forest. Due to a lot of activity happening overnight that people were not comfortable with. And, they wanted to close the road. I personally am opposed to it because I think it was poor policy. Have you seen a lot of issues on that road? Or if there were a lot of issues, has that changed any since this discussion brought attention to what was going on up there? What's your experience with that area?
I know a lot of the issues that are up there, and it hasn't really changed as far as what's going on, especially like after hours. I can't really speak of the closures. That's something more to be on the table with our district ranger, Carl.
Sure.
But what I can tell you is, I am aware of the issues that are going up there on Old Stage Road and Gold Camp. A lot of the issues are happening after hours. So, last summer, I can tell you what we're planning. Last summer, I teamed up with Teller County deputies to do night patrols in some of the areas on the Teller County side, and I plan on trying to do the same thing with El Paso County. See if we can get a deputy up there with me to do some night patrols on the Old Stage Road and Gold Camp. Up there by the stables where things are happening and stuff like that. Also, amongst those plans are, I told you we got more permanent LEOs. We also just got a new patrol captain for this area too. So we had to divide our zone was so wide and huge, and the patrol captain we had it was just hard to keep up with everything all the way from down in Del Norte. So they put a new position here, and we're going to try to get him along in with some patrols, and we'll schedule some things, nighttime stuff and whatnot. And I think the more enforcement we get up there during those times, I think the word will spread and that'll help out. So that's
when that issue came up, and I sat in on some public meetings, and I think the majority of people recognized that the Forest Service was doing what it could, and some of that was not in the National Forest. It was before, it was in that dead zone, I want to call it, between the city and the forest, in the county, and people recognized that you were doing what you could in your part of it, but people, it seems like the people who are out there doing some of this stuff also recognize if we cross that line, then the feds are going to come after us. If we stay on this side, not so much. And I think some people recognize, and it was certainly my opinion that some of those issues came about because of a failure amongst the more local officials to adequately protect those people up there. And while I sympathize with their desire to close the road, I also thought it was really just a bad idea. But I'm glad to see that you're going to be up there. You're working with Teller County. You want to work with El Paso County. I think just the appearance of more law enforcement up there is just going to make people feel a little better. Yeah. People who live there, and then the people who are doing the stuff they shouldn't be doing, probably going to take notice and decide, let's not do that stuff anymore.
That's the hopes behind it.
Yeah.
You're right about the dead space. It's from where the hardball ends and the dirt road begins is about 3.1 miles up to the Forest Service boundary, and in between there is a lot of stuff happening in between there as well. But it's also happening from the border of the forest on, toward the stables, and so yeah, we're definitely going to get out there.
Good.
That's the plan.
When I was with the sheriff's office as an arson investigator, we would often get cars that were stolen in the city, and they would drive them just a couple bends around the pavement and then set them on fire. So I would have to go up and get
We're better to hide them, right?
Oh yeah, it's like, now I got to go up there because you stole it in the city, but you decided to burn it in the county, and I had to go up there and I spent many a day towing burned out shells of cars off of Old Stage Road. So I know what you're dealing with up there, with people just going just a little bit outside to just do something they shouldn't be doing. With your, being focused on, the forest, you're, like you said, you're responsible for protecting the resource, protecting the people, not only the employees of the Forest Service, but the visitors and the users of the forest out there. Was your training, I'm imagining you did your training at FLETC down in Georgia, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Did your training sit mostly in the law enforcement side of things, or did you get was there also some training in natural resources so you could better understand it? How did that training go for you to prepare to be a Forest Service law enforcement officer?
Most of the training down at FLETC, it's all basic. It prepares you to be a cop, to be a law enforcement officer, what to expect, how to protect yourself, and get home safely. And I would say most of my experience and training for the resource side of things was on field training. When we were out we have 3 months of field training with 3 different officers that are FTOs. And, that's when I started getting more experience. And then once you're on your own, then you start experiencing what's going on in your district. And so as I, was out on my own, I was starting to experience a lot more different things. So you kind of learn as you go. That's how I would answer that. You learn as you go. Nothing really surprises me anymore. I feel like I've seen just about everything here on my district, but
I bet.
But there's always something, but I learn something every day, something new every day.
Sure. And I know some of the staff at the Pikes Peak district, and they're a great bunch of people. So I imagine you have a really good resource pool, knowledge pool to fall back on if you have a question about something in regard to resource protection or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. I feel I have a really great strengthened relationship with my district. I'm on the district meetings with them every week just to let them know what I'm doing, what I'm seeing. They let me know if they come across something. And if I have questions, whether they're biologist questions for wildlife, or hydrologist questions like, hey, or engineering, anything, I can go to my district and ask them specifically, and they'll give me the answers right away. If I come across issues, I'm saying, for example, I was having an issue with some off-road stuff up on Gold Camp, this beautiful meadow, and we had signs up, 3 signs that said no motor vehicles. But sure enough, just about every weekend I'd go up there and somebody's parked in there camping out, which is fine. They can camp out, they just can't drive in there. So I brought it up to the district, and it's maybe a week later, we organized something with our recreation staff, and we went up there, fenced it off, put some signs up, left a little opening so they can hike back in there if they need to go camp or whatever. And I thought I was really proud of that, so we worked together as a district. I even went out there, pounded in some fence posts and stuff like that. So it was a good day. And ever since then, I haven't had an issue in that meadow. So.
Cool. And that's what you're looking for too. I imagine it's easier just to get people to just understand why those rules are there, and B, to just go, comply with them, than to try to be the bad guy and write tickets or make arrests and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because as I know, that's a boatload of paperwork you really probably don't want to do too often. Let's just talk a little bit about the structure, the organizational structure. As the law enforcement officer, is your chain of command necessarily through the district, or are you kind of separate from, you work in the Pikes Peak district, but is your management chain separate from the Pikes Peak district, or how does that exactly work?
Yes. So my first line supervisor is my patrol captain. Above the patrol captains, all the patrol captains in the zone and in the region, is the commander for the region. The commander's out of the regional office in Denver. And then you have, your assistant special agent in charge, and you have your special agent in charge. And then beyond that, it goes up to Washington, D.C. What I do, I do keep in contact with Carl, our district ranger, on almost a daily basis, or whenever he needs something, just to kind of keep him informed of what's going on in his district. So this district it's my district. It's where I'm stationed, as you will. I look at it kind of a military standpoint. Wherever I'm stationed at, that's where I'm working, so.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's how our chain of command works. But as long as I keep the district ranger happy and all the people in the district happy, then my boss is happy. So
long as the district ranger's not calling your patrol captain, things are probably good.
exactly. Yep.
Very cool. Earl, this has been a really great conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. And I definitely appreciate the work of the public information people at the Pueblo office for helping get this done. And for people who don't know, there's a lot of paperwork that has to happen for these interviews to occur, so I appreciate their help. And of course, you being here. What else do you want to tell us about your job that maybe we haven't covered or haven't asked you about?
Oh, man. I love my job, Bob. I really do. There are times I want to bang my head against a tree or something, but to the most part, I have great contacts up there. I love educating the public, even if somebody's doing something wrong. I feel like I've accomplished something if I can educate them as to why they're doing something wrong and why it's our laws are this way. On any given day, I can go out on a four-wheeler or side by side or something to go patrol this beautiful property. And I find new things just about every day. Every time I'm out on patrol, there's something new, so it's not, and I'm not stuck on one certain spot. I'm not stuck on Gold Camp. I'm not stuck on Rampart. I can go out as far as, South Park Ranger District or up to the South Platte Ranger District or anything like that. If there's details down at the border or up at the border or states that have, got a hurricane or something going on, a fire, I can go on those details. So I'm not limited to the Pikes Peak Ranger District. I can spread out on details. And the people I work with are phenomenal. My LENI brothers and sisters, it's just the support that we have with each other. And a lot of us have a lot of the same backgrounds. There's a lot of military backgrounds. There's a lot of, all the different people in our district and our LENI staff as well. They all have different histories. So it's fun to learn about them and get to know them and help protect our resources with them. So I absolutely love my job.
Cool. That's great to hear. You mentioned military background. Do you have a military background?
Yes, sir. I was an Army engineer for 6 years active duty and spent a couple years in Iraq and a year in Korea. The rest of the time was Fort Lost in the Woods, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
I was just curious. So you didn't have any law enforcement background while you were in the military?
No, I did not.
Okay,
no.
And that's great. I mean, I know some, some of the park rangers, they came from a military law enforcement background. I came from a military law enforcement background, and did some of that. So I was just curious about that. But thank you for your service in the Army and for being in very dangerous places. Somehow I managed to, by weird timing, avoid all those really dangerous places during my time in there. But I thank you for your service and doing that kind of stuff. Earl, any last words? I mean, really appreciate you spending the time being here today. Any last words you want to give us?
I was actually going to ask you if you have, do you allow shout outs on your podcast?
Absolutely.
Oh man, I just have a few.
Okay, go for it.
So I'd like to give a shout out to the Forest Service family, our LENI brothers and sisters, our district staff for their hard work and dedication to protecting and managing our resources. For one, to all of our volunteers, such as Focus on the Forest, they have a major role in keeping our resources beautiful, and I appreciate them, and I know all of our staff appreciate them as well.
Focus on the Forest does great work.
Oh yeah, definitely, and I love working with them. And last but certainly not least, my wife and kids who've always supported me throughout our journey. And I just thank you to everybody, and thank you, Bob. I appreciate you.
Well, Earl, thank you so much, A, for being on the podcast, and B, for being out there and protecting our resource and protecting all of us and the great people like you've mentioned who are out there working and volunteering in the forest. I do appreciate that work. I know it's not easy work. I know it sometimes can be pretty lonely out there when you're the only person encountering some other people, and it's balancing good. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm trying to find the phrase and it's escaping me right now, but balancing good people skills along with just good law enforcement skills to just keep things kind of under control out there. So I appreciate all the work you do. And again, I appreciate the work from the Public Information Office down in the Pueblo office for help making this happen. I hope we can have you on again and we could talk some more about the work you're doing out in the forest. And always feel free, if you've got something you want to talk about, reach out to me and say, hey, let's get on the podcast, and we'll make it happen.
Sounds good, Bob. I appreciate that.
All right, Earl. And that's Earl Huie, who is the law enforcement officer for the U.S. Forest in the Pikes Peak Ranger District. A great conversation, and thanks everybody for listening to the Outdoors with Hiking Bob podcast.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.